Hello, I'm Gabriel Mateus Bernardo Harrington, and this is my SSI Fellowship Application 2026 for Peer Mentoring Disguised as Code Review. So, to give a quick background on me, I did my undergrad in pure sort of biology and went on to do a PhD in an orthopedic hospital based on spinal cord injury. And this was where I learned to code, became very excited immediately about um, coding, about better research practices, basically, sort of observing that there are much better ways of doing research that I wasn't really taught in school and that a lot of my colleagues weren't really aware of. And so I sort of wanted to evangelize, started delivering training to colleagues and students, had reasonably good success with ECRs, less so with more senior sort of PIs because the sort of incentives are frankly do not very care very much about the quality of their research. But I sort of became a bit of a mission of mine, feeling that anything I could do to try and move the needle on improving research practices will be very, very impactful, probably much more so than any of the actual specific research that I was conducting myself. So that's sort of become the sort of background mission to my academic career since then. Having completed my PhD, I went on to do a postdoc bioinformatician role at the UK Dementia Research Institute within Cardiff University, where I'm still based. So I should talk a little bit about the UK DRI. So the idea is to create a sort of single research institute that sort of brings together a lot of the expertise within dementia research across the UK, pooling their expertise, pooling their resources in order to make advances on these very difficult, complicated polygenic diseases. In practice, the resources have helped and sort of it's been beneficial, but there hasn't been as much collaboration because PIs are still PIs and their incentives are still what they are. To sort of be cagey and not share the results and sort of not improve practices because funders fundamentally aren't doing things to really improve and promote open research and good research practice. So for my part, I joined the ECR Informatics Committee and became co-chair of that committee, which is sort of chiefly involved in trying to sort of build a community of informaticians within the UK DRI. So there are over 600 researchers within the UK DRI, and usually we get around 100 people or so engaging with our events, our sort of in-person symposiums, our remote workshops, other bits and pieces. And in my engagement with those, I've met a lot of people who basically, the majority of them have the same background as me in that they are pure biologists with no proper formal training in software development, in statistics, for example, in informatics things. Most of them are self-taught either out of interest or by necessity. And there is a strong appetite. There's a sort of acknowledgement that there are better ways of doing things, but a lack of support because many of them are isolated as the only informatician in their lab. They don't really know the people around them that have expertise to support them. And there are various expertise, of course, spread across the UK DRI, but it's often sort of in its own little pockets that isn't really spread and distributed through the institute. And so the goal of this fellowship is basically to try and sort of address this. So the first thing I like to do is do the software software carpentry train the trainer program. And the reason I like to do that is because I'd like to base this on their version control course, because of course they're the experts and they spent a lot of time and effort and expertise building that course. There's no sense reinventing the wheel. So I basically want to do a pilot locally at Cardiff University in the first instance and bolt on this code review aspect where we basically assign the attendees randomly into code buddy pairs, tell them to sort of pick a project that they're working on and suggest to arrange a weekly time that they meet and sort of basically share the code they've been working on and seek advice and guidance and sort of feedback on what it is that they're doing and the approaches they're taking. Because most of them aren't used to version control, I want to give them a GitHub template that sort of has the documentation to support them in doing this code review, but also takes the opportunity to sort of signpost them towards other good practices, things like thinking about their making a computational environment, so package managers, and how they sort of record their software environment, whether that's Docker, whether that's Conda, whether that's whatever. And other things around stats, signpost them to the Turing way, sensible file naming schemas, various other things. And I think feedback from the SSI fellow community would be really, really valuable here because I'm sure lots of people will have opinions and expertise in kind of how to document this, what things to include, what not to include, that sort of thing. So that'd be really, really valuable. The idea would then be to sort of give it a month, get feedback from those people, sort of see how they're doing on the course itself and both the code review, sort of what's working, what's not working, incorporate all of that feedback, and then travel around the remaining UK DRI centres to deliver the training again in person in the first instance, using the rest of the budget on travel and accommodation and hopefully at least a little bit of catering to sort of help drive that turnout and build up this network of informaticians and people who are interested in getting code review buddies for their work. Obviously, this would favour connecting local people in the first instance, within that centre, so within Cardiff, within Edinburgh, within Cambridge, so on and so forth. And I think that's really useful to have people in person because sometimes it's just easier to go down to the other building or whatever and you just show a laptop and ask for help and support. So I think it's useful to connect people locally, but I would encourage them to then say for each subsequent project, come back to the network and request a new code review buddy and then bias them towards bridging different networks. So they sort of expand their network, say between Cardiff and Edinburgh, for example, just to build that network across the UK DRI at a sort of grassroots level rather than sort of senior PI level. And hopefully that supports the science and the software practices as well. In terms of the benefits of doing this, I think obviously more people knowing about version control and using it as a foundation of sort of collaborative software, I think is really, really useful and important and a win in and of itself. But I also think there's a huge motivation to improve the quality of your code if you know you have to show it to someone to make sure, a lot of people are using Jupyter notebooks or are Markdown and Quarto, and things don't actually run from top to bottom anymore because you're doing this sort of iterative data analysis and you never really take the time to go back and clean things up because, your PI or your colleagues don't really care or understand what it is that you're doing. And so you don't find the time and sort of effort to actually go back and clean things up and document things properly. Whereas if you have to sit down and show your code to someone, there is that motivation to be like, okay, let me clean up this mess and actually make it clear how this is working so that I can demo this to my colleague and, it actually makes sense and isn't some incoherent, rambling mess of code. And, it actually works. There's obviously the networking aspect, meeting new people both locally and across the UK DRI, which I think is a big win. And hopefully, I think the sort of best practices will sort of percolate up through the institute as people sort of meet new people through the network and they sort of see their different ways of working and their different ideas. The kind of good, better practices will sort of start to bubble up and percolate through the whole network. And of course, from my perspective, I get to gain lots of experience in training and community building and access to the wonderful SSI fellowship community, which would be wonderful. So yeah, that's basically my pitch. Thank you very much for listening. The slides are available on GitHub here.